let's start the session. So thank you very much for your attention. I would like to start saying welcome to this event, and also thank you very much for attending this particular talk. I am very happy to see so many familiar faces that year after you are here supporting this academic event, and also so many young and new faces to me, which means that they are also contributing big time to this thing. I have to say that from some sessions, I'm very humbled by the quality and the strength of the new generations, so I think we are definitely doing very well. I am honored to be speaking today on behalf of the Spanish Economic Association, mostly because I highly respected those scholars who have been previously holding this position, but also because it allowed me to interact with great people, okay? So I would like to say thank you to Luisa Fuster, Vicente Cuñat, Natalia Fabra, Lola Collado, Pedro Mira, and Javier Ualde. Thank you for the journey. In addition, I would like to also mention all the committees of the Spanish Economic Association, and especially all the activities and all the work they have done. From PhD schools to leading workshops in industrial organization and gender economics, just to mention a few. I thank all members of this community and committees for their effective work and contribution. They really make a difference. On a little bit more negative aspect, in 2023, the CNAI, Comisión Nacional Evaluadora de la Actividad Investigadora, modified the criteria to award the Research Excellence Recognition. Shortly after that, in February of 2024, ANECA, Agencia Nacional de Evaluación de la Calidad y Acreditación, modified the criteria for the accreditations of associate and full professors. One of the basic lessons we learn and teach in economics is that individuals react to incentives. So designing the appropriate incentives is crucial for the well-functioning of the institutions. The new criteria that were proposed in February 2024 made very clear three big concerns. First, quantity once again was gaining over quality. Second, those criteria were making the distance between us and those departments that we would like to mimic bigger instead of shorter. And third, both types 1 and 2 errors were most probable with the new criteria. The Spanish Economic Association published a statement, and I'm very grateful to all the honorary members who actually endorsed very quickly this statement. Even though many times we can only send signals and only make statements, I do believe they're important. And we are not sure how much importance they have, but indeed, we have to say that those proposed criteria were modified at the end in a better way, or at least on the side of improving in the final proposed criteria. I would also like to thank many great scholars who anonymously and very generously participate very actively in all these duties and in order to correct these incentives. So they definitely also make a difference. However, today we are here to talk and hear about research. This is our main motivation. So I would like to thank the University of the Balearic Islands for not only accepting the challenge, okay, but also for making it work, because this year we did ask to celebrate these two academic meetings simultaneously. The Department of Applied Economics, the Business Economics Department, and the Faculty of Economics and Business made a great effort and I can only say thank you. In particular, I will always be thankful for the organizing committee led by Pau Ballart. It has been a pleasure to work with you. Also, the scientific chair, which is the second pillar of this big event, and the scientific committee has done a great job. They have done an amazing job in selecting all this paper, and I would also like to take the opportunity to thank you, Miguel Almunia, for all this work. Before I pass the word to the Dean of the Faculty of Economics and Business, I would like to make two announcements of two recognitions that the Spanish Economic Association awards. The first one has to do with SAEe Award 2024 to an outstanding research contribution published in SAEe in the past 3 years. The jury members for the 2024 edition of the award, Rosa Ferrer, Juan de Moreno Ternero, and Virginia Sánchez Marcos, decided to grant the 2024 SAEe Award to Miguel Ángel Borrella Mas and Martin Rode for their article, Love is Blind, Partisan Alignment and Political Corruption in Spain, which was published in SAEe in September 2021. Unfortunately, they're not going to be here to receive the award, but we are going to make sure that they actually receive this award in Pamplona, Navarra. The second announcement has to do with another initiative of the Spanish Economic Association, and in particular of the Committee of Education, which is the award to the best undergraduate thesis. This year, we received over 40 theses, and the 3 selected for the diploma are the following. So when I say your names, please get here to get the award. So I'm going to start with Alessio Di Gennaro from the University of Valencia. The title of the undergraduate thesis is Cambio estructural en el ciclo de las emisiones de carbono en Estados Unidos. The second one is for Samuel Alexander Sánchez Olszewski de la Universidad de Carlos III, Designing Human AI Decision Systems, Anthropomorphism and Framing Effect in Human AI Collaboration. And the third one is for José María Cueto Vivar from the Universidad de Cantabria, Desigualdades de Género en España, Selección al Empleo y la Brecha Salarial. Okay, so today, unfortunately, he couldn't make, but I wanted to mention the title. I will also make a small announcement about SAEe. So we got some good news in the last report saying that now it belongs to this Q2. Okay, so for those who are interested, I think nevertheless it's very good news. And also that it's open a special issue on gender economics that is going to just close at the end of this month, which is the 30th of December. So please, if you have a good and interesting paper on gender, please submit to this special issue. So to finish, I would like to wish you a very productive meeting. As I said, here we are mostly to hear and to talk about research. One more time, I would like to thank the organizing committee led by Pau Ballart and also the scientific committee led by Miguel Almunia, and also to all of you for making it happen. Now, finally, I would like to give the word to the Dean of the Faculty of Economics and Business of the University of the Balearic Island, Pepe Carretero.
Thank you, Nagore. For me, it's a pleasure to give you the welcome in name not only of the Faculty of Economics and Business, but also of the departments Nagore SAEe, Applied Economics and Business Economics department. So welcome you to this conference of the Spanish Economic Association. Well, if I don't remember bad, we were the host of the symposium like 15 years ago in 2009. So for us it's a privilege and an honor to be the host again, and thank you for the trust, not only of the Spanish Economic Association, also of the European Econometric Association, no? And thank you for choosing us and also for the trust. I am sure that we will not disappoint you, not only us, also the island, and this nice weather today, so enjoy it. First of all, I would like to thank, Nagore has said, but for me it's an obligation to say thanks to the local committee, leading by Pau Ballard, and Nagore has said, no, their hard work, you will see everywhere, every minute, and they did a very good job for these conferences to could have a good development. No? I also thank to the Applied Economics Department and also the Business Economics Department and the former and current directors, Aleix Calveras, also Tomeu Pascual, and Daniel Cardona and Victor Troster. No? They support, they are co-hosts of these conferences, so thank you for your generosity and also for your work. No? And finally, it's a must. I need to thank our students that are volunteers, those people that are wearing these jumpers, blue jumpers with the logo of the university and everything. So, and they are here just for no incentives, only the jumper. That is maybe is the reason. But I think that finding students that are really committed to that, with the desire and the willing to help, is something that this is amazing, and for us is a nice. So thank you guys for your help. No? Well, for us, the reputation of the symposium, no, of the Spanish Economic Association is very well known, not only nationally, also internationally, and I think that saying it shortly. If you make research in economics, I think that this is the year appointment that you cannot miss. So it's like that. No? Also, one thing that is very relevant for us is the econ market, and with your permission, I will get the word for making a bit of self-promotion. Now, here at our departments, as you know, many of you know, Applied Economics Department and also Business Economics Department are really active in the job market. Every year, we are trying to hire people, and we are firmly committed with selecting people basically through two key aspects or criteria that are talent and potential for a promising academic career. No? And that's every year. With this in mind, every year we have hired excellent researchers, mostly young people, but also senior. So this is a signal that I think that we are doing proper things, and we are not so bad. And my personal feeling is that our university, faculty, and departments are on the map on the job market. So, and this for us is a very, 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 very good thing. No? I can proudly say that we have built a rich, collaborative, and healthy environment for developing high-quality research career and also academic research in economics. No? And this is mainly what we can offer here in Balearic Islands, in the University of Balearic Islands and our departments. No? Besides, of course, of a really nice campus that you have seen today, and also an amazing city where it's worth to settle down and start your life. So for those junior and maybe seniors also that want to join us, So we are here, no? So well, we wish you a very profitable, productive participation in the conference. Work hard, that you are here for work, and get immersed into the highest quality at the level of excellence of economic research, and also debates during these 3 next days. And also don't forget to enjoy all the social activities, that not only work, no? There is other things in the life, no? We know. And just to finish, for those who regret that your visit at Mallorca is not in warmer days, no, but as an economist, I will give you 2 arguments for stopping that feeling. No? Don't regret to be in winter. So one of the things from an economic point of view, travel expenses are cheaper now, but it's very convenient. And from a second point of view, no, in terms of utility, the negative externalities of the excessive tourism are very low now. So since the island is not crowded as usually is in summer, so for our local people here, this is a privilege. So you enjoy, really enjoy to see really relevant, nice spots and seaside, and well, enjoy it all. So welcome to our university, and enjoy the conferences, and thank you.
Good morning, everybody. One of the last privileges of the outgoing president is to introduce the presidential address. And it is a big pleasure in this occasion to introduce you to Nagore. You all know Nagore Iriberri. She's IKERBASQUE research professor at the University of the Basque Country and a graduate of the University of California in San Diego. I am very fond of Nagore, especially also after working with her, but I think it's absolutely objective to say that Nagore is one of the Spanish most accomplished economists, and certainly a leading authority in the field of gender economics. If there's a gender gap, Nagore has studied it, she has documented it, and she has uncovered the mechanisms underlying it. You name it. Gender gaps among scholars in economics and peer recognition, gender differences and willingness to guess, gender gaps in financial literacy, gender differences in bargaining and negotiation, gender gaps in access to medical intern positions, gender composition and its impact on team performance. It is very clear that not serious study on these topics can be conducted without bumping into one of Nagore's very influential contributions. One of her recent papers, Gender Gaps Among Scholars in Economics, I think is particularly relevant to our profession. Nagore and her co-author analyzed the evolution of gender gaps in economics over the past 9 decades, and their findings highlight significant progress in the share of women among scholars, which is still, in any case, I found it surprisingly low, 25%. And there are persistent disparities in research output. Women publish fewer articles than men, primarily due to shorter active academic careers, and have fewer publications in top 5 journals. Nagore, however, is an outlier in her database. With over 30 papers, including 4 of them published in top 5 journals, I think her achievements are absolutely remarkable. And in recognition of her research, she was awarded the prestigious Savadell Prize in 2015. Nagore's dedication to research has not diminished her broader contribution to the economics profession. She has served as associate editor and board member of several leading journals, and very important for us, I think she played a pivotal role as the head of the economics area of the Agencia Estatal de Investigación. In 2016, when I happened to be the scientific chair of the Symposium Bilbao, I had no doubt who to invite as a keynote speaker. I was lucky enough to have our paths cross again on the executive committee of the Spanish Economic Association when 3 years ago, Nagore was elected as vice president. And I have to say that during this time, I have been able to witness her deep commitment to the profession. A standout moment was her successful organization of the annual Nobel Prize panel hosted every year by the association at the Fundación Ramón Areces. And as luck would have it, the Nobel Prize that year was awarded to Claudia Goldin. I think it's fair to say that Nagore is our Claudia Goldin. And we have been extraordinarily fortunate to have her as our president. I think her leadership, dedication, and contributions to the field of economics and to our community have been absolutely remarkable. Today, Nagore will deliver her presidential address on women and willingness to give, an investigation using a high-stake test in the Spanish health sector. Enjoy it.
Okay, so thank you very much for the presentation, Natalia. A little bit too exaggerated, definitely. But of course, I'm going to talk about gender. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about gender differences in a very particular domain, which is willingness to guess. And the idea is to give you insights about how male and female candidates perform in a very particular test that is going to open to professional outcomes in the Spanish health sector. So I am sure many of you have heard of the MIR exam and the MIR process for medical doctors. Maybe fewer of you actually know that exist very equivalent tests and processes for other professionals within the health sector. One for biologists, one for psychologists, one for pharmacists, and also nurses, okay? So today, I'm gonna be talking about all this. I think it is fair to say that today's talk is gonna be building on two completed papers, especially on the second one that you can see on the screen. Two of them, of course, are with my set of co-authors that I should definitely thank them. So Javier Cardazabal, Marina Diez-Rutuerto, and Pedro. I think only Pedro is present. So thank you for their generosity on me actually using part of the data for this particular project. I should also say thank you to Javier Rey, who actually played a very key role in us accessing and being able to actually do any of those projects. This is my interpretation, but most probably he was moved by two main forces, which is passion for science, of knowing, but also love for their son. So I think both are very loable, okay? And finally, very also note of thank you to Alight Ayarza, who helped me in producing some of these graphs that you're gonna see today. So let me talk about the very specific question that people are going to be facing in order for me to explain what we mean by gender differences in willingness to guess, okay? So this question is taken from the 2002 exam of pharmacists, in the sense that those candidates that completed their degree in pharmacy are going to be facing this type of questions, and depending on how well they do this test, then this is going to determine basically in a great deal which type of position and whether they are going to get a position to become a specialist pharmacist in the Spanish health sector, okay? So in case you cannot read continuously these words, welcome, because I am in exactly the same situation. But the key thing is that in these multiple choice questions, in which there are 5 alternative answers, the scoring rule was as follows, okay? So there are going to be +3 points if they get it right. There is going to be a penalty of 1 point if they get it wrong. And in case they decide not to provide an answer, they basically omit the question, they are guaranteed a score of 0, okay? So it is a pure decision-making situation. Now, if we also find any evidence of gender differences in willingness to guess in this particular type of test, then it would go in the following way. Maybe 85% of men actually provide an answer. They go for actually getting it, okay? And maybe only 80% of women do so, okay? So us, mostly of us trained as economists, probably are going to be just purely randomly guessing among the 5 alternative answers. So in that case, it's a decision theory situation, because basically they know that with probability 1/5, they're going to get it right, so they're going to get these 3 points. However, 4 out of 5 chances, they're going to get it wrong, and they're going to get a -1. Okay, so the expected payoff is going to be negative, and therefore it's a matter of whether I go for it and I expect this negative payoff, or I just refrain from answering and I get or guarantee a 0. Okay? So let's think for 1 second, what can explain this gender gap? Okay? And the first natural candidate is differences in knowledge. Okay? Indeed, if that is the case, then it's right in the sense that indeed the idea of having this differential scoring rule, and what I mean by this differential scoring rule is that getting it wrong and omitting the question is going to lead you to different payoffs. Then the idea is that they would like to refrain people from purely guessing. Okay? Now, what is going to happen many times, and think of, for example, observational settings, which is going to be our case, what is going to happen many times is that even though, in this case, the analyst has a good proxy for their knowledge or for their ability, for example, having the GPA from their completed degree, then even after controlling for this GPA, still we see a gender gap in willingness to guess. Okay, so which suggests that maybe it's not only, or at least it's not the only reason why men and women actually omit questions with different probabilities. Okay? Take a cleaner approach, take an experimental approach, and think that you have a pool of candidates, male and female candidates, who are going to be tested on this type of multiple choice questions, okay? And assume, for example, that their knowledge gap is 0, okay? But keep this in your mind. Now assume that this pool of candidates, we are going to take each candidate and randomly assign to do different scoring rules, okay? So whatever the gender gap in knowledge in the original pool, when we do this random assignment, then definitely in the 2 groups we should also have, in this case, 0 gender gap in knowledge, okay? So what people have done is that imagine that in the treatment group, now we have differential scoring rule, okay, for omitting and getting it wrong. And in the control group, we have no differential scoring rule, okay? What people have found is that the gender gap in performance in this type of 2 scoring rules is actually different between the treated and the control group. And one of the main reasons is that men and women actually show a different likelihood to omit one question, okay? Of course, we restarted with the assumption that there is no difference in knowledge, okay? Now, if it's not differences in knowledge, or not only differences in knowledge, what else can there be? Well, the second and also natural explanation is risk preferences. If women happen to be more risk-averse than men, then women with comparable knowledge are going to be less willing to provide an answer. So this could definitely provide a good also explanation for this type of gender differences in willingness to guess. And finally, the third one is gender differences in confidence. Maybe Pedro and I know exactly the same, but maybe this subjective probability that I assign me to knowing the answer is actually lower, okay? So if these type of gender differences exist, again, we have a good candidate for explaining why men and women may actually show a different likelihood for providing an answer. The problem is that if men and women, for example, do choose this probability of going for the answer or not, led by motivations other than differences in knowledge, then we are basically distorting any performance, especially when we compare and when men and women basically compete or perform for the same things, okay? So this would be the problem. So in education, this gender difference in willingness to guess has been known for a long time now, okay? And they also have a very clear and simple recommendation, policy recommendation, which is delete any differential scoring rule. Because basically based on fairness, if we know that men and women, on top of differences of knowledge, there are going to be other motivations that are going to let them to actually choose to provide an answer with different motivations, then this can only distort and make maybe women in a disadvantaged situation. Okay? Then it's us, economists, who came a little bit later and there has been a little bit of rediscovery of the thing, which happens with many of the things. However, it's also fair to say that economists have focused on two particular, slightly different aspects than scholars in education. The first one has to do with the underlying identification of the motive, okay? So as experimentalists, if we have two alternative and confounding mechanisms that explain potentially the same finding, then let's design a setting such that we can identify how much of each of the two explanations actually is playing a role, okay? For example, risk preferences or confidence. So most or some of the studies go in this direction, and also Pedro and I have ourselves one particular study that tries to identify which of the two things are playing or is playing a key role. My interpretation of this aspect is that for sure what we have learned is that risk plays a role. Okay, so the better risk elicitation method we have, then if we control for it, part of the gender gap in willingness to guess is definitely explained. Okay? What is less clear is how much confidence plays a role, because it is true that indeed in many of the tasks, men and women show a different confidence level. However, in those studies, most of the time, using a control for confidence does not really reduce the gender gap. So there is a little bit of a puzzle in that regard, okay? So there is still work to do in that regard. And the second focus of economists has been, well, most scholars in education have focused on maybe undergraduate students or maybe students in the secondary school and maybe just doing a test that is a midterm or a final, but it's not going to be a big thing, okay? So as economists basically care about important things and in which stakes are important, there was the question of how much of that still exists and is robust in situations or in settings in which really people were playing or having really high stakes. Okay? So in that particular case, today's talk and also the second paper that I mentioned does try to do a little bit of, are we going to see also gender differences in willingness to guess when the candidates are grown up and they are professionally almost trained to the test in which the stakes are high? Okay? However, the conclusion has been very similar. Okay? Delete this differential scoring rule, because if anything, this is going to bring a distortion between men's and women's probability of getting things or even finding gender differences in performance. Okay? It's true that most of the studies in that regard have focused on university entry tests and very few focus on kind of professional settings that I'm going to show you today. So, is Spain different, or how different is Spain? Well, it is different in that, by the way, so one important thing that basically, for example, happened is that in the United States, the SAT test used to be multiple choice, and after all this work, basically, they have moved to having no differential scoring rule, okay? So people and institutions have been listening to these policy recommendations. So coming back to Spain, so how different is Spain? Well, the Spanish health system has had this differential scoring rule for these mere and equivalent processes and tests for a long time now, okay? Since the introduction of this centralized system, which started in 1983, Spain has had this differential scoring rule in this multiple choice question. Okay? In that regard, the multiple choice question scoring rule has been always the same for all these over 40 years. There is the +3 if they get it right, -1 penalty if they get it wrong, and 0 if they decide not to provide an answer. One important change that actually changed the underlying incentives was one change in format of the test that happened in 2014. So from the 1983 to 2014, every multiple choice had 5 alternative answers, so the expected value was negative. And from 2015 on, the number of alternative answers was reduced to 4, such that now the expected value is 0. And in education, this is set such that the penalty is set at the critical value, such that a risk-neutral person would be totally indifferent between omitting and not omitting. Okay, so this is something that I'm going to tell you about in the second half of the talk, because we want to use that as a kind of a natural experiment. Okay? So today I'm going to be talking about this MIR process, but also the equivalent processes for the nurses, EIR, for the psychologists, PIR, the biologists, BIR, and the final one is pharmacists, FIR. Okay? There are 2 more disciplines that I'm going to omit today. One is for chemistry graduates, and the other one is for physics graduates. That is called the radiophysics or something like that. I am going to not look at them, mostly because the number of positions that are there are very, very minor. Okay, so it's one of the things that are not very common. Okay, and the last thing I want to say about this test is that, as I said, it is definitely high-stake test, because whatever they do in this 4 or 5 hour test is going to determine a great deal where they are going to end up in this final ranking in order to be able to secure one of these positions and which one they're going to secure. Okay, so stakes are definitely high. Let me tell you a little bit about the setting. So all candidates who participate in this type of test have to have a completed degree. Okay? So we are going to be talking about people who have between their 22, 23 years old, okay? So they have the degree of the medicine for medical doctors, biology for biologists, and so on and so forth. And in September, the Ministry of Health basically announces all the available positions that are going to be ready for the next year in order to get these internships, okay? In December, candidates sign up, okay? Between the January and February of the next year, indeed, the test is administered and done, okay? I'm going to say a little bit more about the test in the next slide. In March, there is all this publication of the results. As it is usual in Spain, there is first the provisional and then the time to make a reclamation or whatever, and then at the end the final, but at the end there is the final list of all these scores, okay? And finally, they make choices in March, okay? And I'm going to show you how these choices are done. They are done according to a ranking, and in this ranking there's going to be a big importance of the test, okay? And finally, people actually are going to start their training around May, June. So today, I am going to only focus on performance on the test, and in particular on candidates' willingness to guess. And this is going to be measured by the proportion of answered questions, in the sense that how many questions I try out of the total number of questions. This is going to be our focus today. Okay? I'm sure you are going to be wondering about the choices, how they choose, and this is about to come. So currently, this set of co-authors that I described, we are looking at how they choose, and in particular, thanks to the charm of Pedro, we actually finally got the zip codes of their home, and also the zip codes of the hospital they end up with, and also the zip code of the university they studied at. So we are going to be able to study home bias over all these years for all candidates, and also potentially gender differences in home bias, okay? So this is about to come, be expectant for the next months. Okay, so a little bit more about the test itself. So the test is simultaneously held in different locations, okay? The test has had a little bit of variation in the number of hours, in the number of questions also, okay? Historically started with 250 questions and 5 hours. Nowadays, in 2023, I think it was 4 hours and 175, so there has been a little bit of variation, but both things have gone pretty much together, okay? But think about between about 200 questions, okay? Then, as I said, the nice thing is that it has always had this differential scoring rule, okay? This +3, -1, and 0, okay? And one thing that I'm gonna be focusing in the second half of the talk is this change on the available number of answers, okay? From 5 to 4, which having the same scoring rules, indeed, underlying incentives were changed. So how much does the test performance matter? And I'm gonna say most of it is just test performance, okay? So the biggest weight in order to compute the total number of points is gonna come from the test, okay? There has been, again, a little bit of variation. So up to 2009, the GPA from their undergraduate studies was counting up to 25%, and 75% was coming from the test. From 2010 on, the now weight on the GPA is even lower, so 10%, and the test score matters up to 90%, okay? So just to have in mind that the test really matters, okay? And whatever they have done in the undergraduate study counts just a little bit of that, okay? And also to mention that there is also normalization of the score into points, okay? This is not maybe crucial, but the key thing is that both for the GPA and also for the test score, what they do is they take the top 10 GPAs and the top 10 scores, they take the average, and this is going to be set the highest points, okay? The 90 for the test and also the 10 for the GPA, okay? So there is this normalization. And the last thing I should mention is that there is also kind of a passing grade or lower threshold, okay? So up to 2014, there is no such thing, but from 2013 on, there is this passing grade in the sense that not every candidate is gonna move to having one number in the ranking, and the lowest performing candidates, those who are below the 35% of the total points, is not going to have the position in the ranking, okay? So there is a grading passing grade. So let me say 2 very good things about the data and 1 bad thing, okay? If I forget about the bad thing, please remind me. So the year span is 1983 to 2018 in the sense that the really nice thing about the data is that we have the universe of candidates who actually have taken this test since the start of the system, which started in 1983, okay, until 2018, okay? Today, because I want to focus on gender differences, we are going to focus on Spanish candidates, okay, just to be, because there are some and a few foreign candidates who also take the MIR test. But today, think of Spanish male and female candidates. As you can see, the large majority of candidates are from medicine, okay? Also followed by nursing, psychology, pharmacy, and biology. Also, the case or the discipline for nursing and psychology joined this system 10 years later. So their system started in 1993 instead of 1983. So you are going to see a little bit of a shorter time spans for those disciplines, okay? And this is the nice thing in the sense that we have all the candidates, the universe of candidates who take the test. The second nice thing is that we have very detailed performance data, okay? So we have their GPA from their undergraduate studies, from the completed studies. We also know how this was translated into points, which is not that crucial. But this is going to be our proxy of how good they are, okay? So, of course, we would expect that the better students from the undergraduate, they're going to do the better the test. And indeed, this is the case. Okay? Another type of very detailed information we have of the performance is the number of questions they try, and out of those that they try, how many they got correct and how many they got incorrectly. So 2 important performance measures that I'm going to be today talking about are this willingness to guess, which is the proportion of answers that they try, okay? And also the proportion of correct. So think of kind of precision or efficacy in their answering patterns. Out of all that they try, how many they actually get correct, okay? I put it in blue because most of the talk is going to be about the first one, this willingness to guess, but in the second part of the talk, I'm gonna also mention something on their efficacy, okay, or the precision. I forgot about the bad thing about the data. So the bad thing about the data is that, unfortunately, many of these candidates try 1 year, they don't do very well, or at least they don't do as well as they expected, and they decide to come again the next year. We don't have the panel identifier, okay? So every year we see all these candidates, but we don't know how many of those are indeed repeating, okay? So I didn't forget. Okay, 2 more things about the data or about these candidates that are also interesting. The first one is, in case you have not noticed, and I hope you're not many times in the hospitals, but more and more of our healthcare individuals are female, okay? It's a really highly, so the female representation is really high in all these health professions, especially medicine, and this is the one in like dark blue, in case you see it. For medicine, the initial female representation in the 1983 was below 50%, it was indeed about 40%, but in 2 decades, the female representation increased up to even slightly above 60%, okay? And it has remained like this since then. Biology also has suffered this feminization in the sense that starting from this 50%, it's very close to medical doctors nowadays, between 60 and 70%. It's followed by pharmacists, okay, very feminine also, between 70 and 80%. And then we have this psychology, above 80%, and nursing, very, very feminine, slightly below 90%, okay? Something that maybe drew our attention at that point is that pharmacy, psychology, and nursing, they have been very feminine, but also not big changes over time, okay? So they have remained very, very feminine, okay? And the second thing that I should also mention is that differently from other countries, it is indeed a very competitive process or selective process in the sense that if we take a raw measure of how competitive or selective the discipline is, the number of positions, available positions, divided by the number of candidates, there is always going to be an excess of candidates, okay? So indeed, all of the disciplines are very selective, are very competitive, but maybe more surprising, the nice thing about the medical doctors is that over time, they or this discipline suffered a great variation in how competitive and selective it has been. And indeed, the first paper that I mentioned in the first slide actually looks at the relation between how selective and how competitive a process is in that particular year and the gender gap in performance in those years, okay? So we do see that the more competitive, the more selective the process is, the lower and the bigger the gender gap in performance in those tests, okay? Today, I'm not going to be talking about that, but we see very similar processes in pharmacy and also in biology. But nevertheless, it's kind of competitive process. So in this talk, after this slightly long introduction, I would like to tell you about 2 things. So the first one is going to be kind of an investigation of gender differences in willingness to guess, in the sense that from a historical perspective, do we see any evidence that men and women indeed showed a different likelihood of answering? Okay? Do they show any differences in their willingness to guess? And also, differences across disciplines and differences over time, okay? And the second thing that I would like to do in this talk, especially in the second half, is tell you about this small natural experiment that changed a little bit these underlying incentives, how candidates reacted to this, and also whether men and women reacted to it differently. Okay, so that's the plan. Let me start with these gender differences in willingness to guess. And so the questions are two. One is, do male and female candidates show, even in this setting in which it is highest stakes and in which they are highly prepared for this test, do we see any evidence of gender differences in willingness to guess? And then after I show you this, the idea is, can we explain those with gender differences in knowledge or in ability? Okay, so I'm going to show you, well, after controlling for GPA, or even show you the two graphs, the evolution of gender gaps in willingness to guess and the evolution of the gender gap in, for example, GPA, and see whether there is some evidence that indeed what is behind is gender differences in knowledge. Okay? Okay, let me start with medicine. I'm going to do with 5 of them, okay? So bear with me. So gender differences in willingness to guess in medicine, okay? So did it ever exist, gender differences in willingness to guess? And the answer is yes. So especially up to year 2005, women were providing answers to fewer questions than men, okay? And the magnitude, the highest magnitude is also in the early ages, up to 2 percentage points, okay? And this is about 6-7 fewer questions, okay? So it is kind of important. And the second thing that we see is that if anything over time, the gender gap in willingness to guess has decreased, okay? Even in the last years, if you maybe start in 2013, we see that on average, men and women do not seem to be differing in their willingness to guess, okay? So 2 main patterns. Yes, there was gender differences in willingness to guess, and over time, this has been decreasing, okay? Now, is this compatible with gender differences over time in GPA, okay? Can we say that this is compatible with maybe men and women having a different GPA at their undergraduate studies of medicine? And the answer is no, because especially when the gender gap in willingness was highest, women were indeed having a better GPA in their undergraduate studies of medicine, okay? So these 2 things do not seem to go together. Indeed, if I plot now the 2 graphs, one in which I do not control for the GPA at the individual level, and one in which I actually control for the GPA at the individual level, this suggests that the gender gap in willingness to guess is actually left exactly the same way, okay? So this evolution of the gender gap in willingness to guess is not compatible with the story of gender differences in knowledge. There must be something else. Similar thing for nursing, okay? For nursing, the magnitude in this, indeed, is even bigger, okay? Close to 3 percentage points. And also, there is a tendency of this gender gap in willingness to be decreasing, okay? But it took a little bit longer to actually eliminate or decrease. And nowadays, even though it's negative, then it doesn't seem to be significantly different from 0, okay? So these 2 patterns of, yes, there was a winning gender gap in willingness to guess, but over time it seems to be decreasing, it's still there. Is this compatible with gender differences in GPA? Again, not really, okay? And when we control for the GPA, these 2 graphs are remained pretty much the same. In psychology, it's a little bit noisier, but again, the magnitude is always negative. Okay, sometimes it's not significantly different from 0. The magnitude itself is pretty much the same as in medicine, between 2 and a little bit more than 2 percentage point difference. But something surprising is that even though there is a little bit of convergence, still nowadays and in the last year, we do see that women are providing fewer questions than answers to questions than men, okay? This is, one more time, not compatible with gender differences in GPA, so there must be something else. Okay? And 2 more left, pharmacy. In pharmacy, we see also a similar pattern. So there is the gender gap in willingness to guess. Again, this gap was largest in the early times, in 80s. Okay? Again, was very large, about 5 percentage point difference, and this is between 12 fewer questions being answered by women. And again, something that maybe is a little bit surprising, it still kind of survives in the last years. Okay, so pharmacy and psychology are going to be 2 disciplines in which even nowadays men and women are providing answers to different number of questions. And finally, yeah, if we control for the GPA, the story is always the same. And finally, biology. Biology is the one that we have at the fewest candidates. It's a little bit noisier, but again, if anything, in the early ages, the gap was negative and sometimes significant. And again, if we control for the GPA, things are left unchanged, okay? So what we do is that, well, women do show a lower willingness to guess, even in this setting in which candidates are highly prepared and in which the underlying stakes are high, okay? And if anything, almost in all disciplines, the overall trend over time is that it is decreasing, okay? So in some sense, we are having men and women that are probably behaving very closely or very similarly over time. In medicine, nursing, and biology, very recently, maybe in the last 5 years, this gap is either non-existent or very small, okay? And in psychology and pharmacy, it seems to be well alive, okay? The next exercise that I would like to do is, well, how much of this gender gap in willingness to guess is able to contribute to the overall gender gap in total points or in performance or in the ranking, okay? And for that, I'm going to do the following exercise, and I'm going to show you only the graphs for medicine, but you can do the following exercise. Start with the overall gender gap in total points, okay, which is the final score, okay, from all this process, and then control for GPA and see how much of the gender gap is now reduced, and then add the control for their willingness to guess at the individual level, okay, and see how much of the gap is reduced. The same thing with the gender gap, or at the individual level, the precision, how many you get correctly out of the total number, and then all of them, okay? So doing this exercise, for medicine, we start with this graph. When you add gender gaps on, individual level controls at the GPA, we are left pretty much the same. Having control over their differences at the individual level at willingness to guess, part of the gap is gone, okay? Part of the gap is gone also when we correct for their precision, okay? And finally, if we control over all this, the gender gap is pretty much gone, okay? So this is showing that indeed, these gender gaps in willingness to guess, they do contribute to explaining the overall gender gap in total points. So it does matter. Okay? And there are some differences between disciplines, but in all of them comes at significantly reducing the gender gap. Okay? So part of the story has been important in explaining these overall gender gaps in performance if we look at the variable of the gender gaps in willingness to guess. Okay, so let me now move to the last part of the talk, and the idea is to give you insights about this natural experiment that we can exploit. By the way, it's a small change, okay, in the sense that we move from 5 different alternative answers to 4, okay? So do not expect big things, okay? But nevertheless, it was worth looking at it. So as I said, the change was subtle. Funnily, if you just look at all the official papers published in the Boletín Oficial del Estado, you are not going to find references to this, okay? But we know for sure that it happened, and we know for sure that it happened because before the actual exams, between 6 months and 8 months before, all the professional magazines of doctors and pharmacists were already picking up because it was announced that the number of alternative questions was going to be reduced, okay? And we do have evidence on that. So indeed, it was announced way before, okay? And people knew about it, okay? As you will see. So the change is subtle in the sense that up to 2014, every multiple choice question had 5 alternative answers. And after from 2015 on, every multiple choice question is going to have now 4 alternative answers, okay? So subtle, from 5 to 4, okay? And this happened in every discipline, okay? We do have the test because all these are still available on the web, so you can actually, because after the exam is done, many times they release the test and the answers and so on, so you can test that. So as I said, the actual scoring rule remained the same, okay? Now the only change is in this reduction in the number of alternative answers from 5 to 4. So if you think about it, the easiest case to think about is what or how a risk-neutral person would behave, okay? So before the change, the expected value is negative, so even a risk-neutral would be just saying, if I'm just randomly guessing, I'm not gonna go for it, because I prefer a 0 rather than a negative, even though the negative is so small. But now, with this change, you are totally indifferent, because both yield 0. Okay? Because now the underlying probabilities is not 1/5, it's 1/4, and then 3/4, then you are basically exactly the same. Okay? So a risk-neutral person would be totally indifferent between randomly guessing and not guessing, okay? Because the expected outcome is the same. For this small exercise, I'm gonna focus on years 2014 and 2015, okay? Which is the closest time window I can have. In the robustness that I will mention later, we do increase a little bit this window, and all the results remain the same, okay? So here, what should we expect? So some of the things are very clear, some of the things are not that clear. So let me start with the clear things. So clearly, this small change in the reduction on the number of alternatives is making now random guessing more attractive. Okay, so if anything, what we should observe is that we should observe an increase in the proportion of answered questions. Okay, so this is clear. Now, in terms of gender gaps, remember when I showed you the historical patterns in some of the disciplines, on the mean values, many of the disciplines were very, very close to each other, okay, men and women, like medical doctors. But in some other, in 2014, we are still gonna see some gender differences, okay? And the third question, do men and women react differently to this underlying test, this underlying change in the format, okay, in the underlying incentives, okay? So these are going to be the 3 questions. I'm gonna do a simple regression framework. I'm gonna control for the GPA always, okay? But then female, 2015, and the interaction between female and 2015, okay? I'm gonna start with an OLS, and then I'm gonna show you the quantile regression along the distribution of the outcome variable, the willingness to guess, because something that is going to be very interesting is to say, well, how do men and women behave among those who answer most of the questions and those who answer fewest questions, okay? So let me start with the simple OLS. And let me start with this thing that I was telling you. What we should expect is that everybody should increase, or on average, people should now go for more questions, okay? And indeed, this is what we see, okay? The 2015 coefficient, with the exception of biology, it's highly significant and also positive, in the sense that this underlying change in the incentives, okay, so even though the scoring rule remained the same, this reduction in the number of alternatives made guessing more attractive, and this is indeed what we see, okay? The magnitudes are largest in medicine and pharmacy, and this is about 9-10 questions more answered now, okay, after the change. Regarding the gender difference, by the way, if you look at the constant, on average, people are answering over 80% of the test questions, okay? So it's high. Regarding the gender coefficient, okay, so before any change, so what is the gender coefficient? So we came to this particular study looking at medical doctors, and at first we were a little bit surprised to see, well, medical doctors, they're not regular people because we don't see any gender difference, okay? But nursing, psychology, pharmacy, and biology, we have regular gender differences in willingness to guess, in the sense that on average, women tend to answer fewer questions than men, okay? However, when we look at the interaction between 2015 and the underlying changes in incentives in 2015, nothing is there, okay? So it seems that everyone increased, and men and women basically increased in a very similar way, okay? Now, let's move to the quantile regression, because we are going to see some interesting heterogeneity, and I'm going to start with medicine. On your left figure, This is the female coefficient over the distribution of the dependent variable, the willingness to guess. Okay, so the gender gap among those who guessed very few questions and on those who actually answer almost every question. Okay? So if anything, even if in medicine, on average, we don't see any gender difference, if we focus among those candidates who are answering most of the questions, okay, so from the 50th percentile on, the gender gap, the negative gender gap, is still alive. Okay? It's small. It's between 1 and 2 questions. But it's kind of surprising that among those candidates, we will see later whether they are the best candidates or not, but at least for now, those candidates who are answering most of the questions, women consistently answer 1 to fewer questions, okay? And maybe more interesting, that particular part of the distribution, if we see their differential reaction to the change, if anything, they increase even more their willingness to guess, such that now the field is actually leveled for these candidates, okay? This second part thing is going to be replicated in every discipline, okay? And let me show you briefly. In nursing, we see that, again, women show a lower willingness to guess, particularly among those candidates in which are answering most of the questions. And if anything, their increase in their willingness to guess after the change is even bigger than that of men, such that part of this gap is actually recovered. Okay? Something very similar in psychology, but the effect is so tiny, most of you in the back of the room are not going to see it. Okay, so it's really tiny, but in psychology, again, we see that if anything, among those who are answering most of the questions, they still are answering, women are still answering 1 fewer question, and they catch up after the change. The same thing in pharmacy, and the same thing in biology, okay? So, even among those candidates, even in those disciplines in which maybe at the mean men and women behave very similarly, along the distribution of those who are answering, especially most of the questions, women are consistently answering fewer questions. And if anything, this change in the format brought them closer, okay? Now, if we do exactly the same OLS regression, but focus on the 90th percentile, and we now also do replicate this on the 75th percentile, and the results are the same. Here we see that women were consistently, in all disciplines, answering fewer questions, and the change in the format made them increase even more their willingness to guess, such that either the gap is closed or the gap is reduced. So in some sense, this small change indeed brought the field closer to each other in terms of gender differences in willingness to guess. I try to be careful in talking about gender differences in willingness to guess among those who answer most of the questions. Should or could I also talk about those who are the best? And the answer is yes. So if we do these triple interactions with GPA, indeed what we see is that among those candidates who have the highest GPA, their willingness to guess in terms of gender differences is even bigger for women, okay? So everything that I said before in terms of the quantile regression on the top part of the quantile regression, I can also talk about among the best candidates, if anything, gender differences exist, and this change brought them a little bit closer. The disappointing part is that when we look beyond gender differences in willingness to guess and see whether this leveling the field actually also brought men and women closer in terms of other performance measures, such as precision or total scores, the answer is not significantly, okay? So we do not really observe that the actual gap in test score that brought this change actually made them different, okay? Let me briefly mention 3 robustness tests, and then I'm gonna wrap up. So instead of taking this short window, time window, 2014 and 2015, and we look at a little bit wider window, everything goes through. We don't want to go farther because there are also other small changes that this is very Spanish, no? So they make all these changes at the same time and then figure out exactly, it's not easy to figure out what led to what, but at least we can guarantee that between 2013 and 2014, these are the changes and everything goes through. We also have some nice placebo tests in the sense that maybe just focusing on years, on 2 consecutive years in which we should not observe any of this, like for example 13-14 or 14-15, then the placebo tests actually come out nicely in the sense that we don't see any of these changes in the willingness to guess. And the third thing, I'm sure most of you or some of you may be thinking, well, this reduction in the number of alternative answers, even though it did change the underlying incentives, it also allowed them a little bit of more time per question, because instead of considering 5 answer questions, now we can actually concentrate on 4. So what do we do in order to consider that or give that particular explanation a chance is to say, let's focus on some other particular years in which only the time per question changed, and we do not observe in that particular change these type of differences in the willingness to guess. So at least we are kind of sure that this is motivated by the underlying incentives. So let me conclude. So despite stakes being important, okay, people care about how well they do in this test. And these people indeed are very highly prepared for this test. Still, historically, at least, this gender gap in willingness to guess has been there, okay? And it's true that if anything, if we look at this historical perspective, we see that in the 80s, clearly this gap was definitely bigger, okay? Nowadays, there has been in all disciplines a decrease of this. If you ask me why this might be, my guess, but I can only guess, is that on the one hand, there is a learning process, and on the second hand is that this preparation for the test has been now very, very professionalized in the sense that most candidates devote at least 6 months to be trained to actually do this test. And part of the training is a strategy to the test in the sense that how many or when we should really answer the questions. And this, if anything, is going to equalize men's and women's because you've been told and you've been trained to behave in this way, okay? The second thing is that exploiting a little bit of this gender difference, this change in the format, what we observed, and that was, to me, maybe the most interesting thing, is that even if, on average, we do not observe big differences, if we focus among those candidates who are performing really well and who are answering most of the questions, there still we are going to be able to see this gender gap, even though it is small, okay? And also, if anything, any type of change in the direction of reducing the penalty, reducing the differential scoring rule, is going to make them become closer to each other, and I'm referring to men and women, okay? However, it's true that in terms of actual performance, like total score, we cannot really say much. And finally, after this, if it was not convincing enough, I would say, I think that still the policy recommendation is the same. Take out differential scoring rule, okay? On the one hand, as an examinator or institution that want to really know how much these people know, if you keep this type of scoring rule, at the end, many candidates are going to kind of hide how much they know, because there are going to be candidates who decide not to answer, and it's wrong to believe that this is going to be purely because they don't know. Okay? So in that sense, ask them to respond to every question. You want to know how much they know. Okay? Also, this worry about, well, it's true that just out of luck, people are going to get some of the questions right. Okay? Even I can get right by chance the first question, even though I have no idea about the right answer. Well, at least we know that luck, in this case, is going to be blind to different social groups. Okay? It's not going to make any distortion between men and women. So Let them guess, okay, if they really don't know. And finally, I would also like to say, well, there are other format changes that would allow you to discount or to basically adjust for this random guessing or getting it right by luck, okay? So maybe just increase the number of alternative answers, okay? This would reduce the number of questions you're gonna get just out of luck. Or also, another policy thing that can be done is adjust this passing grade, increase this passing grade, because you know that every candidate, by chance, is gonna get a certain amount of questions right. So adjust this passing grade, okay? But allow everyone to provide answers to every question. So I think that is all I wanted to say, so thank you very much, and I'll be happy to take questions if there is time. Libertad.
Sorry, I'll start again. So I was wondering if the focus on gender here might be kind of not the most important one, in the sense that these types of tests, what they're doing is they're hurting test takers who are underconfident or risk averse, right? And we know that in terms of gender, actually the distribution of risk aversion and confidence, the distribution for men and women actually overlap quite a lot, even though there's a small difference in the mean, and so but there are going to be a lot of women who are actually who are confident and risk loving, who are going to love this kind of test, and there's going to be a bunch of risk averse and underconfident men who are going to be hurt. So in a sense, these small effects that you're finding, it's because you're focusing on gender, but in fact there are many people who are going to be hurt by this type of design, but both men and women. So I wonder, do we know any other, so what is risk aversion and underconfidence, what is that correlated with on top of gender, right? So who are the kinds of people who are getting hurt by this type of grading policy? Thank you.
So that's that's a fair concern, in the sense that it's true that I'm focusing on gender mainly because I know they are going to rate higher in those two dimensions that you are mentioning, okay? Of course, ideally, you like to know everyone's risk preferences and everyone's confidence, and maybe also take that into account in their answering pattern, okay? In this case, I take the shortcut of focusing on gender, but to be honest, in all this literature on education, the focus has been also on gender, because this is maybe the one group that we know for sure is gonna score high in those two particular explanations. And I don't fully agree that we don't care, because if you actually look how men and women have been performing in these tests and in getting access to these positions, especially over time, there has been big and important gender differences. So I think especially it is worrying that women who have a very high GPA, they consistently perform worse. And I think part of the story in this, indeed, is these gender differences in willingness to guess.
Thank you, Nagore, very interesting. So my comment is related to the last point that you mentioned in the conclusions that I was thinking over your talk, that there's been a growing in these training academies, and particularly for medicine, that they teach to the test, no? And they're very successful in teaching to the test. And we know, or at least in the medical profession, it's very well known where are these academies located. And so you mentioned you have the zip code of these individuals, so maybe you can actually understand who of these individuals are going to these academies, very successful academies, because of the zip code, and you can see whether these individuals that go to these academies are less or are more successful or are responsible for this equalization of the willingness to guess.
So unfortunately, we don't know exactly where they are going to take the test. Okay, so this is going to be highly correlated to the place where they have been training to the test. So it's true that historically, at least for medical doctors, this Academia of Oviedo was super famous. Yeah. I think nowadays there are many, many of those. Also in Madrid, some of them are very, very like highly prestigious in preparing. So yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how much we can indeed dig deeper on this, but definitely this reduction over time, I think, has been a learning process, and also preparing for the test, like pure strategy, not only how much you know.
Okay. It's so nice to have this panel compared to that thing, because it is true that in our paper that we studied just the latest year, with the same result, our conclusion was the opposite, was the fact. There are plenty of literature saying that basically the women skip, but when there is high stake and they are trained, which is, I think, is the right setting for many things, this is disappear. But still there are something, it is true. Still there are, you can see something. And maybe another way to explain this difference is the goal that they pursue. The goals, yes. Now that you have the location, because it's something that we want to do, is just to check. Or if you, for example, want the toppest, basically the most demanding one, then you have to take risks, because there is no other way that you basically can get it. But if you don't want this, but you just don't want to fail, you can be more conservative. There are differences in the choices. Maybe you can explain still this remaining thing.
I mean, ideally, of course, we would like to have their preferences before they perform. Okay, so let's think for 1 second on the ideal type of data that you like to get. So of course, we want to know a good performance predictor, which is going to be the GPA. But ideally, you like to know what is your objective? What are the type of specialty and hospital that you aim for? Okay. We don't have that, so we can only do ex post, in the sense that, so nowadays, one of the, especially for medical doctors, the top choices are like dermatology, okay, surprise, surprise, mostly because they don't have night shift, and also the outside option of having your own office is very generously paid. But all these things, I can see that they are interesting, but at the end, it's exposed after they chose. So you don't know exactly what they really aimed for. Okay? You have? Oh, yeah. No, in terms of home bias, yes. So we're very excited about this home bias project.
So thank you. In part because of your work, we changed the way we graded the Principles of Economics class, about 2,000 students. And the coordinator tells me that he's very happy. And he also implemented this. We reduced the passing grade, so we take a few points, and he says it's wonderful, so thank you from the profession. So I had kind of one observation. So you're saying that the results of the guessers are better than the non-guessers, but the I thought you were saying this because I was a bit puzzled, because it sounded like the penalty actually should, penalize guessers, although maybe the guessers know a little bit. So, and that's related to my second question. Do you know by hardness of the question, or at least hardness exposed of the questions, whether there's any differences in gender by hardness?
We do something like that in our concurso de primavera, having an external measure of hardness, like how difficult the question was, also how difficult by gender, because it could be that there are also gender differences in there. And there we didn't find any different patterns for difficult and easy questions, or the more difficult and easier questions, to put it into relative terms. But I know some people actually have found some differences in terms of that, okay? And what I meant today is that when looking at precision or total score, we don't find anything significant, okay? So this is what I meant. It's not, and sometimes when I talk about willingness to guess, it's basically whether you responded or not. So I don't know whether you are guessing or not, okay? Later, the thing is that in this exercise of comparing these 2 years, in terms of actual performance, nothing significant comes out, so we cannot really tell. So it's a little bit of a silence in that regard. But I think, nevertheless, I think the policy implication is clear. Like, I don't think we gain much in having these penalties, because, as Libertad is saying, definitely is hurting those who are more risk-averse and less confident, independent of their gender. Thank you.